di Development Studies Program. Dalam kesempatan kali ini, Dr. Kevin akan menyampaikan hasil tesis PhD beliau terkait dengan bagaimana mendorong partisipasi lebih lanjut dalam global value chain dalam bisnis pertanian pangan. Sebuah studi kasus mengenai peran dan kemampuan perantara, ini menarik sekali ya, industri beras dan mangga di Filipina. Ini ada keterkaitan yang kesamaan yang sangat kuat antara Indonesia dan Filipina tentunya, yang memang antara perantara inovasi yang biasanya melalui organisasi ini begitu penting dalam menggerakkan bahkan pertumbuhan ekonomi di kedua negara ini, khususnya di Indonesia yang kita ketahui bersama. Dulu ada koperasi unit desa yang merupakan gabungan daripada gabungan Boktan, kemudian yang berhilir kepada kelompok-kelompok tani. Ini merupakan bagian mungkin kesamaan antara Malaysia dan Indonesia dan Filipina. Studi Dr. Kevin ini mencoba untuk memahami, kalau saya baca dari resume disertasi tesisnya Dr. Kevin, bahwa studi Dr. Kevin ini mencoba untuk memahami lebih baik bagaimana sih perantara inovasi menjalankan perannya dan membangun kemampuan utamanya untuk membantu secara inklusi dan partisipasi lebih lanjut serta meningkatkan kemampuan produsen dan UMKM dan pelaku lainnya dalam merantai nilai dalam hal ini adalah beras dan mangga di Filipina. Bapak sekalian, sebenarnya kita ketahui bahwa industri agri-food atau pertanian pangan telah memainkan peran yang sangat penting dalam menghidupkan perekonomian global dan memastikan ketersediaan pangan yang memadai bagi masyarakat dunia di tengah tantangan global seperti peperangan saat ini, perubahan iklim, bahkan pertumbuhan populasi yang demikian dahsyat. Dan ini semua tulang punggungnya adalah negara-negara berkembang, sebagaimana Filipina dan juga Indonesia. Oleh karena itu, pemahaman yang mendalam tentang bagaimana menciptakan partisipasi lebih lanjut ya dalam studinya Dr. Kevin ini dalam sektor ini adalah suatu hal yang krusial. Oke, baik sekali Bapak sekalian, mungkin tidak perlu berpanjang lebar kami sampaikan di sini karena kita akan lebih lanjut ingin melihat bagaimana hasil riset Dr. Kevin itu bisa nanti kita terapkan antara Filipina dan Indonesia, khususnya di sektor industri pangan pertanian. Baik, terima kasih kepada Uniola yang sudah bersedia menjadi moderator kali ini dan bersempatan moderator, dan juga mungkin sekaligus sebagai translator ya, Dr. Uniola ya. Kemudian juga kepada Mbak Tiwi yang sudah menghubungkan dengan Dr. Kevin sehingga bisa hadir sebagai narasumber pada pagi ini. Jadi sekalian, silakan Uniola dilanjut pertemuannya. Terima kasih bersama. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for the opening remark. Okay, this is our esteemed speaker for this webinar detox, Mr. Kevin Christopher Elgo, PhD, hailing from the Philippines. Mr. Kevin holds an impressive educational background, having attained his Doctor of Philosophy in Public Policy from GVCs, Tokyo, Japan in 2022. Before that, he completed his Master of Public Policy at the same institution in 2018 and obtained a Bachelor of Art degree with a major in Development Studies. Currently, he serves as an assistant professor at Development Studies program at Ateneo de Manilla University, where he imparts his knowledge on poverty and development, public policy, SDI, and community development. In addition, he has had significant contribution as a student affairs professional, teaching assistant, and community development officer. Mr. Kevin has published several influential papers, including those on power, governance, and global value chain in agri-food sector, enabling innovation in the Philippine rice industry, and the role of urban-based cooperative as intermediary organization. Mr. Kevin also actively participated in numerous seminars and workshops. He has presented and authored several research papers on topics ranging from service learning and civic engagement to innovation intermediaries in sustainable agriculture. Today, we are fortunate to have Mr. Kevin as our distinguished speaker, and he us on an insightful journey through his in-depth research finding. We will gain valuable insight into the challenges, opportunity, and strategies to enhance participation and producer and MSMEs in agri-food business sector. Please join me in giving warm PhD. Mr. Kevin, the virtual floor is now yours to share your enlightening research with us.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope I can be heard. Thank you very much for the great introduction, Ella-san and Dr. Badrun for the introductions as well. Really glad to be invited. Very, very glad and very, very honored to be invited to present my PhD research study that I did a couple of years back, especially during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just a few things, I guess. If my internet is not up to par and if it cuts out a bit, just please let me know. I'm currently at the office. I hope the internet will hold up. But anyway, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or in the Q&A section, and I hope I can answer them later on today, later on this morning rather. So I'll begin. So I'll be, like I mentioned, that was also mentioned, I will be presenting the findings of my doctoral research study entitled Fostering Further Participation in Agri-Food Business Global Value Chains. It's a multiple case study on innovation intermediary roles and capabilities in the Philippine rice and mango industries. As an outline, my presentation is divided into 4 parts. The first part, the introduction, will just provide an overview of the study, its objectives, the gaps, and the gaps that I attempt to address. Succeeding this will be the methodology section, which describes how I carried out the research. I will then proceed to the main findings. Forgive me, that will be a bit long. Then end with the conclusion that offers my various theoretical contributions and management and policy implications. Okay. So to begin, as industries continue to connect globally, in the Philippines and even in Indonesia, integration into global value chains, or GVCs, is very much inevitable. Studies have shown that GVC integration produces a variety of positive effects for local industries and firms. However, these effects are not necessarily automatic. Domestic industries need to consider how their innovation systems, or IS in this case, interacts with the GVC. And this interaction often leads to a very and even more complex understanding of participation in GVCs. So one important facet of the innovation systems that adds to the complexities of GVC integration are systemic barriers and gaps that hinder innovation and upgrading. These are challenges that industries and countries need to address. And this is especially true for developing countries like Philippines and Indonesia that exhibit more of these gaps and barriers compared to developed countries. Addressing these issues and in turn, developing the GVC or IS relationship maximizes the possible value creation and learning that local industries may have. These developments also help with poverty reduction. Moreover, studies have found greater effects even when developing agri-food business or AFB industries. So AFBs, or agri-food business industries, are value chains that fully link the upstream portion and downstream portions from like fresh crops and the processed product segments. So these chains, which I'll show a bit later on, are not just single product value chains with just one line, but they consider multiple fresh and processed product possibilities. So going back to addressing systemic gaps and barriers, the IS, or innovation systems literature, suggests maximizing the support that innovation intermediaries may provide. So these organizations address these gaps by leading knowledge and technology transfers and by stimulating the innovation network to promote industrial cohesion, collaboration, and development. So further, what are innovation intermediaries? So for this study, we adopt Howell's definition of intermediaries, where he defines them as an organization or bodies that act as agents or brokers in any aspect of the innovation process between 2 or more parties. Reviewing the literature further, we find several important facets to intermediation. So first, intermediaries have a range of roles, functions, and services that create the foundations for the intermediation concept. Second, studies have also found that the type of organization that the intermediary is really matters, and that certain types have specific roles to play, especially when you consider public and private sector dichotomy. Finally, two very recent studies also show that successful role performance, or for them to do their intermediation, this requires building a set of certain key and underlying capabilities. But to discuss this a bit further, I'd like to go back to the GVC-IS coevolution relationship and how intermediaries fit into this relationship. So first, allow me to explain how this GVC and IS thing co-evolves through this figure here, adapted from Lemma, Petrubelli, and Rabilotti, and Lemma, Rabilotti, and Sampa. So in it, firms first learn and build their capabilities to participate and compete locally and globally. So these are the local firms here. Now, the arrow from the GVC to the firms informs them of requirements for global competition. They need to be able to survive in a GVC. Firms will then attempt to learn and develop the capabilities necessary to compete. If these capabilities cannot be developed in-house or within the firm, the innovation systems of the country notes these and provides the avenues for the firms to achieve these capabilities. So, in fact, circling back, with the necessary capabilities in place, firms will then hopefully innovate and upgrade to participate in the GVCs. And then the cycle will just continue. However, issues may occur when innovation barriers are present. Examples of such are like transaction challenges, information and access asymmetry, or the inability to develop firm capabilities. Innovation intermediaries may come into play by attempting to address these from either the GVC or the IS side and provide firms a boost to achieve the capabilities required for local and global competition. Moreover, innovation intermediaries may also aid in the entry of firms or producers into this GVC-IS relationship. And one developing country that really needs to maximize the services of its innovation intermediaries is the Philippines, or the context or the venue of my study, right? So local studies reveal that the country exhibits a multitude of gaps and barriers hindering the innovation and upgrading potential of its industries. So this study was done during the Duterte administration, which was in power then, took a more active stance, the administration took a more active stance in addressing these by promoting policies that showcase innovation in the forefront. So seen below here, the four here, are several of these key policies. However, despite targeting different GVC and even innovation system levels, these policies hardly mention the role that intermediaries may play. And it appears that the Philippine government and local industries lack a proper understanding of what industry, or what intermediaries rather, what they are and what they can offer in developing the IS relationship and the participation of the Philippines in the global value chain. So this study's primary objective is to develop a richer understanding of how innovation intermediaries may A, perform their roles, and second, build their key capabilities to create innovation and upgrading opportunities for producers, MSMEs, and other value chain actors. And in doing so, we hope to offer several critical implications for policy, management, and theory, of course. So this study, in preparing for it, I also did an extensive literature review and found several of these gaps, and that this study tries to address more knowledge gaps. So first, I hope to integrate through this study intermediary research with and between the GVC-IS relationship, as most studies currently on intermediaries are very much centered on the innovation systems literature. Additionally, I want to add evidence and knowledge on newer types of innovation intermediary organizations. Specifically, in this study, I include social media groups, private firms, and additional evidence for NGOs that act as intermediaries, at least found in this study. Second, I also target the lack of intermediary role performance in value chains. So most studies tackle intermediation in very single segments, looking at how intermediation works in a single segment of a value chain. And I believe there is a need to conduct more role performance comparisons within single or across different and multiple value chains. Third, I also addressed the criticism on the sectoral innovation system regarding the lack of analysis on demand conditions. So for this study, we very much specified two demand conditions, domestic and export as primary markets, and compare the findings between these two as intermediaries work within the differing demand conditions. Finally, I tackled the applicability of the key capability framework by applying it into the global value chain literature and into two AFB or agri-food business industries. So to address these gaps, I try to answer the following research questions. So the main question being, how do innovation enabling or intermediary organizations perform their roles and build the necessary key capabilities to support the inclusion and participation of various players in AFB global value chain? So I also add 3 sub-questions that target important facets and gaps. So these are on organization type, value chain segment support, and primary market orientation. So these 3 also serve as my independent variables. So the figure on the right shows my conceptual framework where we assess changes to an intermediary's roles and key capabilities as variations occur within the 3 independent variables. To analyze these, I employ 2 frameworks. So first is the 4 roles of intermediary framework by partners that assesses the roles in 4 different aspects: as a broker, a consultant, a mediator, and a resource provider. Second framework is the 4 key capabilities framework to enhance resources and networks, originally written or done and conceptualized by Suthi Jakra and Interacom Nerd. This framework was adapted to based on another study I did several years back. Thus, we employ a mixed version of the 2 studies and consider the 4 key capabilities as such: external networking, internal communication, knowledge building, and management. As mentioned, the research method that I employed here is a multiple case study. I deemed it as the most appropriate as it amply answers how and why questions. So Robert Yin, also describes case studies as the best employed when studying phenomenon that have very rich contextual conditions and several variables, like in this study's case. So I specifically designed a descriptive case study that allows me to explain the cases using theories as a guide for the scope and the depth of the cases. And for data collection, I employed semi-structured interviews, focus group discussions, research observations, and secondary desk research. I also attempted to do a more longitudinal design that tries to track the evolution of the intermediaries from their inception to current state, as described and narrated by through the interviews I conducted. So the study also espouses a embedded design where multiple embedded units of analysis build the cases. So as seen in the slide, the case unit is that on an industry or sectoral level, and the unit of analysis is on an organizational level. So to triangulate the data, I made sure to interview a variety of value chain actors, requested their consent to participate, asked for feedback on several findings, and conducted secondary desk research to validate several claims and, of course, build onto the cases. For case selection, now I follow Robert's take where he mentions that we lean towards or choose cases that provide opportunities to learn, which are accessible and allow ample time for the researcher to spend on, especially during this period. It was the height of the pandemic. I could really only do most of the desk research and a lot of the interviews online or over the phone. So in the end, after choosing for a while, we ended up with, among several possible cases, we chose the rice and the mango industries. So this slide here shows a Venn diagram of the primary reasons why we selected the 2 industries, their similarities and their unique traits. So it isn't a circle, as most Venn diagrams are, but I tried looking at it as a circle. It didn't really look very nice. So I hope this rectangle still does the job well enough. But anyway, the main reason why we chose these 2 industries is because of the primary market priority. So in the Philippines, the rice industry represents a very much more domestic-oriented industry, while the mango industry represents a more export-oriented one. So these are further supported by import and export statistics by the Philippine Statistics Authority and by recent policy changes instituted, for example, through the rice tariffication law and the government's, at least then, goal of revitalizing mango exports. So although both industries have individual challenges from themselves, as seen in this slide, they also share many common issues. These issues are problems that intermediaries may aid in addressing, as observed from the literature. It is thus interesting to also see how intermediaries may address these challenges in the Philippine context. So here, this slide presents a visual representation of the multiple case study It represents two cases side by side. So on the left is the rice one, and on the right side is the mango one, where the larger contexts are in the larger boxes, so the more solid colors, so the larger boxes there. The cases themselves are presented in the broken lines, so the inner boxes. And the embedded case units are these smaller ones, or the participating intermediaries. So these are the ones in the small boxes. So the three boxes in the middle actually signify three intermediaries that commonly work in both industries. So for this study, we consider 6 types of organizations, split between, of course, public and private. So there are government agencies, or GAs, which I use as an acronym, public research institutes, or PRIs, industry associations, or IAs, social media groups, or SMGs, private firms, and NGOs, or non-government organizations. So altogether, we include 18 organizations in this study. 3 of them are government organizations, 4 are PRIs, 4 are industry associations, 3 are social media groups, 2 are actually private firms, and 2 are NGOs. So just to share some more research highlights, so I conducted the interviews with industry experts first between November 2019 and January 2020, and then the pandemic hit, but still, I tried my best to do data gathering. So it was mostly done for the course of over 2 years, 1.5 years rather. So from March 2020 to November 2021. So a total of 42 semi-structured interviews were done, and 2 focus groups were done during the period of the interviews, or at least the data gathering period. Okay. So to move on to my general findings. So this table here provides several of the highlights of the study, these per variable as well, and their effects on intermediary roles and key capabilities. So in general, for organization types, we find all organizations performing all the roles and building 2 capabilities similarly. However, while we also see organization-specific differences, in network-related capabilities, which we will discuss further on. For value chain support, we find that public and private sector organizations exhibit very well differences in performance, with consultancy and mediation a very common constant throughout the chain. For key capabilities, however, we also appears that the mere presence in the value chain actually affects building mechanisms of the intermediaries. We find greater focus for role performance priorities when taking a market orientation and public-private sector dichotomy into consideration. Moreover, taking an export mindset appears to create greater marked changes to key capability building and even role performance. And I will delve into these points further as we discuss each variable and its effect in more detail in the succeeding slide. For every variable, I will first discuss their effects on the roles and then the key capabilities. Okay. Oh, sorry. So for roles and organization types, this is what we find. We begin by discussing the effects of organization type differences. So this slide shows a brief summary of their shared and unique role performances as organization type will change. So overall, we find that, again, all 6 types represented perform the 4 roles, albeit they perform these in varying magnitudes and approaches. Not all perform the 4 roles in the beginning even. So most rather learn to conduct the 4 roles later on and even simultaneously. And another interesting finding is that role performance actually overlaps that all organizations do. For example, there are overlaps between resource provision and brokerage that government agencies and PRIs do during the ensured provision and transaction even of technologies and inputs. Another is the overlap of mediation and brokerage observed from trade introductions, mediation, and transactions. There's also an overlap of consultancy and resource provision that many organizations do when they provide staff for example, secondment or even advice giving. So the performance of roles are actually mixing in together already. Moreover, regardless of industry, we find that similar types of organizations perform roles in many similar ways as well. The differences we find may be explained by several factors. So these are the factors that we find that differentiate role performance. So we find that first, mandate of the organization, policy, vision, and mission that relates to the primary objectives of the intermediary in question often delimit the actions and services that an intermediary may perform. The second factor we find is target audience, group, or partner, what they need, that sees the intermediaries adjusting its role performance based on what the intermediary partners need. Third has to do with their export likelihood, their support and participation that sees changes in their capability or ability to provide advice or capacity for this rather, and influences even the content and actions that they do when performing roles. The fourth factor is experiences of successful or failed intermediation in the past. And this usually gives an intermediary the ability to assess whether it wants to continue or cease performing certain roles. Finally, the fifth factor are crisis events, or what we want to call crisis events. These are role adjustments as a response to crisis, like for example, COVID-19, changing how mediation method was done from face-to-face to purely online means, and adjustments to content and performance frequency, even when export standards would change. So these are some of the role performance factors we found. And moving on to key capabilities or key and organization types, we first find that certain key capabilities are built in fairly the same way, regardless of what your organization type is. So these capabilities are knowledge building and management. Based on the data, we posit that these two capabilities act as very foundational key capabilities. Moreover, we find that these two capabilities are each built around three different aspects. For knowledge building, these rely on the knowledge on the industry and value chain and partners and constituents and the value and the nature of the crop. The first refers to the understanding of the intermediaries' understanding of the industry and the processes of the value chain. And the second refers to refers to the knowing the needs and characteristics and goals of their partners. And finally, the third relates to the crop itself, or how knowledgeable they are of the crop and the products that can be generated from the crop. It pertains more to the biological and scientific nature of the crop rather than the industrial and manufacturing side, which will come up here in the industry aspect. And then for management capabilities, we delineate capability into aspects of operation or implementation, administration, and even human resource development. So the first pertains to the ability and skills of an intermediary to implement its directives and programs. And the second relates to its financial and internal controls, as it needs, of course, the intermediary needs to ensure that the organization is well and sustainably managed. And the third aspect is somewhat special, and although currently we place it under management capabilities, the previous studies often observed it dispersed throughout the four capabilities. But in our study, the interviews also revealed how much more significant the building and training of one's human resources are. With the emphasis given to the human resource development, we actually believe and posit that I actually believe and posit that this aspect can be taken possibly as a fifth capability, rather than just the four. So human resource development as a fifth key capability may focus on the experiences, for example, of leadership, specific skills and expertise of the staff, and even staff development programs. Taking it as such may prevent even overlaps with other key capabilities. So management capabilities of the organization or the intermediary will focus more on operations and administration, knowledge building, and codified forms of knowledge, while external networking and internal communication on expanding and even sustaining their networks. So this is some of the more interesting findings. When it comes to differences in organization types, we found more marked differences, again, the two network-based capabilities. So we find that each organization type builds these capabilities towards very organization-specific tracks, as shown in this slide here. So these are built in multiple ways, such as introductions to new partners, industry consultations, participation in partner activities, new or succeeding collaborations, and communicating through social media pages, building and maintaining reputations, and communicating updates to members, staff, and partners. And then in developing these two capabilities, trust and social capital still remain very much essential building blocks, thus aligning very well with findings from previous studies. Furthermore, intermediaries are able to create and find opportunities for further role performance when building these two capabilities. So for example, through their international networks, NGOs and industry associations extend community development assistance to their partners in harder to reach areas because of their international networks. So overall, in building key capabilities, we find that collective learning occurs as development in one capability also often generates growth in another as well. So for example, expansion of one's network generates new knowledge about their partners and opportunities. So following these findings, and it's very similar to what Shruti Chakra and Intercomner did, we find that strategic and learning capabilities also remain very much so essential underlying capabilities. However, we also find evidence of a possible third underlying capability in motivation. Somewhat similar to a study done by Ramirez, Clark, and Clerks, motivation pertains to an intermediary's outlook or perspective towards providing intermediation itself. So in our study, this was especially highlighted by the public sector that underscored their very service-oriented mindset and passion for work. Thus, like human resource development, further studies on motivation as an underlying capability may merit some attention. But in this presentation, I know I am unable to highlight differences in key capability mechanisms between different types of organizations like I did in the paper. However, the differences are indeed very much so present. And what I want to present here and focus more on are the factors that we find that may contribute to the differentiation. And this is what I will be showing next. So the four factors we find for key capability differentiation would be first, foremost, policies, national and international, learning events, and again, crisis events, leadership and changes in leadership, and finally, funding sustainability. So the first two are very similar to those discussed in the roles in that they affect changes based on policies or events such as certifications, requirements, signaling the development of knowledge building capabilities and management capabilities, or for example, RISE Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, recognizing internal communication methods for implementing agencies. The factor on leadership here affects key capabilities as, for example, maybe like leaders in creating changes in how an organization operates and what it will actually prioritize. So different management styles may focus, of course, on building certain capabilities more than others, while this is found through our interviews as they reveal how changes in leadership may also create risks for some of their programs, especially in the public sector, which I think we also experience, right? Where new leaders may choose to defund or even add funding to another day are more in line with a program, a policy, right? Finally, the fourth factor on funding sustainability does not only pertain to funding itself, but also includes the other aspects of an organization's sustainability. We may consider investments in human resources, the funding models that an organization has, or even their operational sustainability as a factor for building different key capabilities. Okay. Excuse me. So this is at least where the organization type as a independent variable ends. So we move on to the next portion on intermediation in the value chain. So second variable, I present here the two value chains with the intermediaries laid out vis-a-vis the different segments they are present in. So the upper left one here is the rice industry, while the lower bottom right one here is the mango value chain that we have. So from the figures here, we first noticed that the intermediaries in the mango value chain appear to have a greater presence, with more of the organizations actually present in many, even most or almost all of the value chain segments. This is likely due to the chain being more tightly wound nature because of how the mango processes are, and because of more monitoring is done throughout the value chain, especially because many of them are involved in export. They really want to track everything much more. Another finding that is the absence of public sector organizations, and those in orange, from the consolidation segments of aggregation here in rice and assembly and trade here in mango. So there's a very big lack of or absence of public sector organizations there. Although the public sector is actually pushing for farm consolidation, it appears that they still have a lot to actually they still leave a lot of it to the public sector, to the private sector, right? Rather, the trading proper itself. Still, the public sector has some efforts in consolidation as they provide inputs for those already organized groups in the input supply and even processing segments. Next, looking at the global market segment here at the very end of each of the value chains, we also find a significant lack of intermediary presence, at least those found in the Philippines, right? So those that are already present there, however, are intermediaries that actually do or have partners involved in export and even the import of certain products. A likely explanation to the lack of intermediaries here is the focus placed by most intermediaries on tackling local industry development issues first. It's good. We believe that as the local industries develop, interactions with the global market segment will likely increase even more. Um, Moreover, another possibility to the lack of global market segment intermediary presence is the presence of other non-participating organizations. So, as the study was carried out, we were unable to encounter many more organizations that were unable to encounter many more organizations that were highlighted in this segment. So sorry that we weren't able to include more there. But further research may focus on actors that are more present in the global market segments of the value chains to learn more about their roles and key capabilities in linking, of course, the global market to the local industries. So moving on to role performance in the value chain, we first find that most roles are actually performed in the input supply and milling, post-harvest, and product split segments of the value chains. So these segments actually have the heaviest needs for hard and soft technologies, especially in terms of inputs and knowledge requirements, which is why it wasn't very surprising that these segments exhibited the most role performance. Although not shown here in this slide, we also observed that the public sector organizations actually perform more roles than the private sector organizations in these segments mentioned. Especially when conducting or performing resource provision and brokerage. A possible explanation to this are the high costs associated with these segments the government usually provides or subsidizes instead. Another interesting finding is the performance of consultancy throughout the both value chains. This is likely due to the need of actors to consult on various topics and issues faced in any segment of the value chain. For example, in the production segment, actors are likely to consult on issues they face as they grow the crops, such as pests or diseases, while in the consolidation and marketing segments, they may consult for possible buyers or marketing strategies. Mediation is another important role in the chain that we find. So various intermediaries perform this role by linking trade partners or processes between and within the segments. Another form of mediation that is done is price mediation, actually, which many private sector intermediaries try to perform. In addition, intermediaries also perform mediation of knowledge and technologies that often overlap with the performance of resource provision and even brokerage. Another critical finding is that several roles or intermediary services actually go unnoticed in the value chain. Actions such as, for example, lobbying, community organizing, or even the conduct of R&D may be unseen due to their nature of not being very directly involved in the production processes. Nonetheless, these services or roles are very much essential as they target the institutional environment that surrounds the value chain and then the industry itself. So because of this, we find that the current framework that we have may not be enough to capture all essential facets of intermediation in value chain. As such, we propose a 4-aspect framework that incorporates intermediation, roles, and chain upgrading mechanisms. So this is something that I haven't been able to publish yet, but I'm currently writing a paper on to hopefully make it more published. So we classify intermediation in value chains as these 4. So first, horizontal intermediation that captures roles that lead to innovations or upgrading in the production process of a segment. Vertical intermediation that highlights roles that bridge or integrate markets, processes, and segments. Third, intersectoral intermediation that looks at functions that offer opportunities to enter or integrate with other value chains. And finally, chain-encompassing intermediation, which considers roles that target the institutional environment or innovation outside of the production process. For example, like organizational innovation. But moving on to key capability building in the value chain, we first find that individual segments do not appear to affect capability building. Rather, the overall presence or the mere presence in a value chain actually builds these. Similar to organization type effects, we find that knowledge building and management are also very much so foundational. Next, we find that external networking and internal communication capabilities act more as responses rather than and are built the more these are applied. No? So intermediaries build these two capabilities by broadening and maintaining their networks for technology and knowledge diffusion and provision mediation of trades, and even by linking segments of actors together. So interestingly, we also find that these two capabilities are built and applied to aspects even outside of the value chain. So these are seen through, for example, building and maintaining R&D collaboration networks, community development networks, and in intersectoral or grading opportunities that occur outside of the main value chain process itself. So, to provide a better way of assessing factors that possibly affect key capability building in the value chain, we actually provide, or I try to do it in a more three-themed way, and offer these themes in form of questions that intermediaries may ask themselves. So first, what is our value chain approach? Is it more segment-specific or targeted, or a whole chain approach? And it will help them think of how they can build their key capabilities, especially when you think about management and knowledge building. Second, do we engage with the global market? If yes, how do we build the capabilities for firmer controls and monitoring? Because, of course, the global markets or competition there is much stricter, right? Third, do we want to compete in the value chain? This is an essential question. So if yes, what firm or technological capabilities are necessary for the intermediary? And this is what we find in many of the intermediaries that we actually interacted with. Remember that competing actually even means engaging in profit-seeking behavior to ensure financial sustainability. So intermediaries will need to ask themselves how they may actually still uphold their intermediation purpose or their core if they will end up competing. And this is primarily because they need to be able to sustain themselves financially. So deciding on these will really greatly affect what networks these intermediaries will need to build and sustain, what knowledge they will need to acquire and apply, and what management skills they need to operate and administer, and what human resources they need to develop in order to remain as effective intermediaries in a value chain. So this ends the value chain segment of the findings. And moving more towards the differing market orientations or the demand conditions, this is what I tried to do first. So instead of assessing very specific organization types, we assess the effects of the differing demand conditions of domestic and export market on the dichotomy of the public and private sector. So we follow a very similar case method presentation by Interacom Nerd and Sharon Porn in discussing this topic in succeeding Venn diagram. So the roles in this table signify those expected from either sector. So these are the expectations. So the texts in bold font are what we assess are better suited roles for the dichotomy in their respective orientations. So tackling public sector first, we find that regardless of orientation, be it domestic or export, they need to really perform all four of the roles. And this is likely due to their resource availability, which makes them perform input and technology resource provision and brokerage much more than the private sector. But of course, looking back, this may possibly be because we live in a developing country where the private sector is not as strong yet. So although a need to perform all four of the roles is found, a difference between the organizations lies in the rice industry's greater focus on consultancy, while the mango industries, there's a greater focus on mediation. Now, with more advanced communication technologies and tools available, rice sector intermediaries may provide more consultancy services more efficiently and even hasten diffusion of knowledge and answer inquiries much faster. On the other hand, the public sector intermediaries in the mango industry may need to perform mediation more at this point in time because of a very seeming lack of industry cohesion or unity. Now, I observed that not all actors are very convinced of the push for export because of the costs associated with attaining and even maintaining export quality mangoes and their relevant certifications, apart from, of course, other issues. So, despite the greater focus on either role, still the performance of consultancy and mediation roles are very much essential and expected of the public sector in both industries. Moving towards the private sector, we find also very little to no differences in role performance priorities between the two demand conditions. Instead, we find that the private sector intermediaries in both cases may need to focus on mediation and brokerage that involve trade, marketing, and transactions. No? Although Entrepreneur and Chowrenporn find that brokerage be a role done more by the private sector, now our study finds that mediation is a more apt role actually in the two cases studied. So mediation in the form of technology and knowledge bridging, organizational mentoring, and even technology replication are activities that appear to be more expected from the private sector intermediaries rather than from the public sector intermediaries. For consultancy, we find that the private sector may also be better suited for this role actually. As we learned that value chain actors will actually prefer to listen to similar actors as they feel that these persons come from very similar backgrounds, understand the experiences much more, and not as persons who quote unquote just studied farming or growing from like similar to most of the people from the government, at least according to the people we interviewed or I interviewed rather. Next, this Venn diagram presents or shows rather several industry requirements that may be needed to boost intermediation success following the study of Intercommerce and Chowrenporn. So essentially, the rice industry may need to better manage its resources. It's provided with like properly maintaining and sharing farm machinery. On the other hand, the mango industry needs to spread the export-oriented mindset much more. Nonetheless, a common need of both industries is the willingness to invest, especially from the private sector. A difference, however, lies in the direction of the investment. So for rice, it is to invest in and adopt newer technologies, and for mangoes, it's geared towards achieving international standards and certifications, much more. When it comes to key capabilities, this slide shows how the public and private sector intermediaries build and apply the 4 key capabilities. For market orientation differences or demand condition differences, these are marked by the R's and the M's, encased in the parentheses, R for rice and of course M for mangoes. So similar to the first 2 variables, we actually find that knowledge building and management capabilities are again very much so foundational and for intermediation in both cases, in both orientations or demand conditions. So next, we also find that many of the key capability mechanisms are shared by the intermediaries regardless of their market orientation. So knowledge building in particular appears to share very similar building and application mechanisms and strategies from either side of the 2 orientations. So either it be mango or rice, public, domestic or export market oriented, or even public and private sector oriented. In terms of differences between market orientations that we may have, we also find or observe that support or involvement in the export market actually appears to generate very big marked differences in key capability and even role performance. So we find that taking a very much so export-oriented mindset shifts many facets of key capability building as well as role performance as shown in this slide. So this is not to say that simply focusing on the domestic market, of course, will not lead to firm or industrial development. Rather, coming from the GVCIS concept, we cannot deny that the influence of the larger global industry, what influence it may have on the local industry. So, and moreover, how being unable to match these global standards creates more barriers to entry and even loss of competitiveness for local industries. So we believe that taking a more global or export-oriented perspective when intermediating actually will also be very much so beneficial. So roles and key capability categories will remain the same, but the manner and content in performing, building, and applying these may vary immensely, depending on several factors as discussed earlier in this presentation. When it comes to, before actually proceeding to the conclusion, we also did a very short assessment on how targeted demand or industry policy may affect intermediation, at least in very general terms. So for domestic-oriented policy, we actually chose to highlight the Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, as it seems to be the most relevant policy. And from it, we find that it lays clearer roles and functions for several public sector intermediaries, although it does not explicitly classify these organizations as innovation intermediaries. So the policy also acts as a signpost, actually, for the private sector to know who to approach and in what ways they may possibly perform roles too. Moreover, The policy may also signal targets such as population cohorts, network skills, and knowledge that may be needed for inclusion and availing of benefits from the RCEF program. No? So, thus, the intermediaries may build their networks and knowledge to comply with these and may even develop or perform roles that target and develop these requirements for their partners. No? For the export-oriented policy, I wasn't really able to find a very explicit policy for this related to the export of mangoes. So as such, a more direct policy or program may be necessary, rather than just having it as a goal stated in the industry roadmaps. To this end, it may be beneficial to include foreign importers and even local exporters in setting up this policy or program to provide the industry and intermediaries better knowledge on export-related requirements and performance. Still, for policies in export in either orientation, be it domestic or export-oriented, we find that having these explicit policies may create a greater sense of industry cohesion and unification, like that as we saw in the rice industry. So, in developing these policies, again, adopting an export or globally oriented mindset, even to domestic-focused policies, may be beneficial for intermediaries to boost competitiveness and even lower barriers to entry. So, in conclusion, I want to highlight several important points that we learned, hopefully, that I was able to show in this study. So first, starting with role performance, I find that various organization types have a very wide and growing range of roles and are influenced by 5 factors, as I discussed. So second, when performing these roles, we also find that intermediaries often overlap and perform these in tandem. Third, in supporting value chains, intermediaries perform very specific roles in certain segments more than others, but consultancy and mediation appear most needed throughout a value chain. Fourth, I also learned that not all aspects of intermediation are captured through the value chain or the traditional value chain approach. Thus, I propose a 4-aspect framework to classify and determine intermediation in the value chains. Next, for market orientation, I found that public and private sector intermediaries have certain roles to perform and that these may be influenced by several factors as well. And finally, I posit that having an export or globally oriented mindset on industry and industry unification really affects the success and how intermediaries perform their roles, especially in terms of the content of their roles. For key capability building, I first find that 4 factors influence key capability building mechanisms. And second, I find that for all 3 variables, knowledge building and management capabilities act as very foundational key capabilities that need to be built. Third, in supporting the value chain, I do not find individual value chain segment effects. Rather, I find that overall presence in a value chain does affect key capability building. And moreover, key capabilities are affected by an intermediary's approach, competitiveness, and global perspective towards the value chain that they support. Fourth, looking at external networking and internal communication capabilities, I find that these 2 are also applied outside the value chain production processes as intermediaries conduct non-production related functions such as lobbying, organizing, and even R&D. And finally, I find evidence to support separation of human resource development as a 5th key capability, and for intermediation motivation to be considered a 3rd underlying capability. However, further studies on these 2 may still be necessary to be able to claim such. For theoretical contributions, there are 2 that I actually have. So I offer 2 main theoretical contributions. So first, this study tries to integrate, of course, intermediation in the GVC-IS evolutionary relationship through the application of these 3 variables, as I mentioned. So I show how intermediaries transcend the boundaries between the 2 systems to perform and build their roles and further assimilate the global value chain and innovation systems. And second, the study further contributes by providing role delineations of the public and private sector intermediaries in the context of agri-food business industries and by proposing a very novel framework to assess intermediation in value chains. So last 2 slides. For policy implications, I offer 5 based on the findings. So first, the government may explicitly identify intermediaries and their roles in policies. This may aid in boosting the role performance of already present organizations and may even be a step for those that require further support to perform their roles. Second, with the push for farm clustering by the government, it is vital that this encouragement also come with managerial organizational development training, as this will allow these clustered groups to remain more sustainable and viable. Intermediaries in this study have shown that they may offer such services, training. Thus, the government may also support these intermediaries in providing these services. Third, amendments to hiring practices and laws may be necessary in the public sector to attract and ensure job security for highly talented and skilled workers, especially scientists and PRIs. Fourth, I also find that there is a need to establish or maybe even re-establish PRIs in higher growth or production areas, particularly in the mango industry. The designated and known PRI is not located in the highest producing areas. Although it is present in an export grade growing province, establishing or transferring their operations in the highest growth areas may actually provide growers there easier access to newer technologies and may even help in addressing widespread issues faster. And finally, in relation to the export mindset, the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Industries, local government units, and other related agencies may create export market tracks for agri-food business industries and gradiate them from markets that are easier to access and to enter to those that are more difficult to penetrate. And finally, for management implications, I also offer 5. So for identified intermediaries or those desiring to offer intermediation, they may adopt Partners' 4 roles framework as a starting point to understand what intermediation involves, what services they may offer, and how they may perform these to support the industry. Second, when working in a value chain, I suggest applying the proposed intermediation assessment framework to locate and assess the roles they may perform as intermediaries. Moreover, industry consultations may also apply this framework to identify and assess the various organizations and roles that are present in a value chain, possibly identifying further needs too. Third, intermediaries may also invest in developing their managerial and business and the organizational development capabilities. So as intermediaries or organizations themselves, they also need to ensure that they are sustainable to continue their work. So building these capacities will, of course, help in this endeavor. Fourth, related to organizational development, intermediaries may house or begin human resource development programs to ensure that they build their 5th capability. And finally, intermediaries may also adopt an export or globally oriented mindset, and adopting such a mindset may help in raising standards and skills to global quality requirements. They or their partners may not necessarily need to enter or participate in these export markets immediately. Rather, raising standards to export quality levels may have foreign markets actually come looking for them, instead of the local industries running to match import requirements and running to look for markets abroad. So this is where I will end my study, or my presentation rather. So with that, I'd like to thank you to everyone who was here, attended and listening, and I appreciate any comments or suggestions that anyone else may have. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity to share my study and my dissertation with everyone here. So thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you. Okay, usually I see that most years.
That's my internet.
Hello, Kevin. Maybe Ella Senpai's internet is not working so well.
Okay.
So yeah, so I'll take in charge in Q&A session. So we already see some kind of questions from Ibu Trisakti. So as you can see in the chat box, the first question is, how does the impact of global value chain on farmers' income and local community? And then is there any government policy to support agricultural land holding in the Philippines for the local community? Or Ibu Trisakti, do you want to address your question directly, or is it clear for you?
I think it's very, very clear.
Okay.
For me. That's okay. I'll answer these first. So In terms of impact of global value chains on farmers' income and local community, it very much varies between products. But essentially, of course, assuming that the farmers are really able to compete globally, it is a very big boon or a very big advantage and boost for their income if they're able to join global value chains. But in terms of mechanisms and how the chain is arranged, that the income may vary greatly. So in the case of some of the mango farmers that are included in this study, um, if they're mango growers that sell to a exporting company, they don't really gain as much because it goes through a lot of traders, the middlemen in between. But if the mango growers, for example, there is one NGO in this study that took part in this intermediary, what they did was they really just were an intermediary. They really just did a lot of brokering for the mango growers. So the mango growers actually gain a lot more from that in terms of income. It's a fair trade organization, so they get fair trade premiums for the mango processed products that they receive or they provide for the industry. However, for example, for rice, the Philippines is probably best known for it being the number one importing rice importing country in the world, and we already beat China. But we actually have some rice that's being exported, but it's not the usual white rice. It's really more high quality, high grade, like colored rice, red rice, black rice, mountain rice. But these aren't usually looked at. So in terms of export, if they are able to join the global value chain, depending on how the setup looks like, they really do gain a lot more. Local communities gain a lot more. That's for the first question. Second, is there government policy to support agricultural land holding? It's still one of the biggest issues in the Philippines. So, do you call this like agricultural? What's the term that they use? Land reform. It's
Land
still
reform, yes.
a very big issue here. It was started during the Marcos era and then continued again during the Aquino after the Aquino
Yes, yes.
administration after the dictatorship fell. But the tendency of the policy itself died. So the policy ended. They had to renew it. So it's not very well made, not very well done. It's not being implemented well enough. Because still a lot of the landowners are in government. So there's still a
Yes.
lot of hindrances that will fully support agricultural land holding. But in cases where land reform was done very well and then land was awarded to farmers, there are a lot of policies and a lot of other programs that support the farmers there then and there. And there are a lot of cases where farmers are able to really develop themselves and even their communities, at least in those very few cases. So I hope that
Okay.
answers the question.
Okay.
Ibu
But
Tri,
you have minimum availability of land holding agriculture in Philippines?
Minimum, I'm not so sure.
Mm.
I know that there are few farmers that even have are considered farmers even that hold like 0.5 of a half a hectare. And
0.5.
yeah, so there's that. But in terms of minimum to be called a farmer, there's really none that I know of, at least.
Okay. And why rice and mango? We compare rice and mango, not another. I mean another food or another
commodities, yeah.
Okay. Well, the study is comparing rice and mango primarily because we wanted to see the difference in demand condition. So rice was very much so policy-wise even wanted to develop the domestic industry, and it's really for the domestic market because rice is one of the largest domestically consumed products, while mango industry, while it is also very much domestically consumed, a lot more of the mangoes is for export market.
Okay.
Aimed towards the export market. So we wanted to see the difference between that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Tri. The next question is from Pak Mujiadi. Maybe Pak Mujiadi, do you want to address your question directly and open your mic, please?
Thank you very much, Mbak Dewi. Mr. Kevin, Excellency. I'm Mujiadi from Research Center for Social Welfare, Village and Connectivity. Big appreciation for sharing your presentation based on your study. It's a quite good idea for enhancing productivity in terms of agriculture business. Hopefully, that will be useful for Indonesia too. Maybe it's quite similar climates between Philippines and Indonesia. Problem that I intend to hear your more ideas, at least two topics, two questions. Firstly, agriculture areas has become decreased recently due to urbanization and industrialization that using some agricultural areas. It means area for planting rice and maybe also mango are getting limited. On the other hand, total population are getting bigger. So agricultural product will not enough to cover all of our needs. In Indonesia, rice is the most important need to be fulfilled. Even some people consume a bit small. So, would you please to share to us in terms of at least and reducing problem for future, maybe such as a kind of policy to encourage farmer to keep work as a farmer and not going to city, or maybe rather than going to city to gain income and make money in the rural areas. Secondly, recently we face changeable climate. It may be has bad impact of productivity with rice and also mango. Would you suggest would you suggest to manage for farmer activities to keep farm product during change climate as recently that enough for cover people need? That's my two questions. Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you for the question. In terms of policy, for with agricultural land getting smaller and population getting bigger, right? It's the same problem here in the Philippines. Like a lot of our agricultural land is being transformed into industrial land or even for housing, even if they're not supposed to, right? But at least in my knowledge, in my studies, and with what I know of currently, one way that we can really address this issue is by adopting newer technologies. So I'm not so sure about Indonesia's case, but in the Philippines, the one that contributes to the highest cost for rice production is labor. We have a lot of not actually rice farmer labor, but just like land laborers who do hauling, who they just get hired to do different activities, which can be it's not very nice to say, can be replaced by newer technologies that would actually save farmers a lot of costs. It's not very nice, of course, because that displaces a lot of our land laborers. But no, it has to be a policy that also addresses that issue. So we have to provide newer technologies and make sure that the farmers, that the ones who will be using it, understand how to maintain and use these technologies well enough to be able to boost their production, lessen the losses in terms of harvest, and in that way lessens their costs, because for us to make sure that our farmers would like to remain farmers and for future generations to want to be farmers, we have to show that rice production and even farming in general is a lucrative job, something that where they can earn money, and in order to do that, we have to make sure that we support these industries, and show that production wise they become a lot more lucrative, in that sense. But at the same time, for those that are being displaced, the farmers that are being displaced, like in our country, what we have is that we partner that the policy or the Department of Agriculture is partnered with the technical vocational institution of the government. So those farmers that are displaced by new technologies are immediately enrolled into these technical vocational skills trainings that will hopefully provide them different roles or different jobs in the future. But more than that, current rice farmers are also provided trainings on different crops as well, or even trainings on handling and raising livestock. In that sense, hopefully, would provide them even more avenue to earn more money. At least that's in that sense. Sorry, can you repeat your second question? Sure.
Okay, second question. Recently, we face changeable climate. It may be
Okay.
that impact of productivity, both rice
Okay.
and
All right. Just the same, I think it's best that you have to look at newer technologies now in terms of rice, not hard technologies like machinery, but climate resilient types of rice. In the Philippines, we have the Philippine Rice Institute and International Rice Institute, that Rice Research Institute that helps out the global rice industry, ERI. There are actually a lot of different species of rice now that are very resilient to different types of weather. And it really matters. The rice that you want to plant really matters, or when climate really matters. And the types of seeds that you use, or for farmers to use, they have to really match the climate and the area and even the soil that is available in that place. So a lot of research has to go into that, and to have to prove to farmers that this is the correct one to use is another challenge in itself. But there are a lot of very newer types of climate resistant rice, like even a flood resistant rice variety. And even if it's covered in water because of floods, it will survive. There are a lot more newer varieties that can help, because even facing climate change. I hope that answers the question.
yes, thank you.
And thank you very much.
Yeah, Kevin. The next question is from on the chat box, as you can see, is from Pak Iwan. As we can read, does the rice and mango commodity value chain process involve the role of actors as traders and off-takers? I think
Okay.
previously you mentioned about the market association or something. Can you elaborate more on that? Thanks.
Okay, so I think the question here, TV, is like more of the like other actors in the value chain. Yes, of course, the value chains will of course have an involvement of traders and other off-takers and industry suppliers in the value chain. I only didn't show it in the presentation because my focus was on the intermediary side, but I do have in the paper a very extensive description and of the industry, of the value chain of rice and mangoes, and all of the different and various actors involved in it, even the different institutions, laws and policies, practices, traditions that are that surround the value chain. But they definitely do have a very big role there. In the rice and mango value chain, the traders are the ones that, at least until now, connect suppliers or producers to markets and even processors. Traditionally, a lot of studies, especially if you go to the development side of things, like they would want to have these traders removed from the value chain because it really eats up a lot of the income that farmers can get. But what I find is that it's extremely difficult to do that, close to impossible, because the traders have actually evolved into a way that they also hold different segments of a value chain, and they don't just do consolidation anymore. Traditionally, we might think of traders as people who would just buy, consolidate the products or consolidate the produce, and then ship it out somewhere. Now, no. Traders, at least in the rice industry, what I find is that a lot of these traders are also the ones that process the rice into from paddy into rice itself. So they're now part of a very essential segment of the value chain. And sometimes even these traders are also the input suppliers, and vice versa. So it's a very, very big mix now. So they take on very different roles as well in the or segments in the value chain, which makes it very difficult for them to be removed. So having to work with these is one way of understanding it. But the way to maybe get away from reliance on traders is for producers to really consolidate themselves together and try to take up a lot more of the value chain segments. So, for example, in mangoes and in rice, they can do the first-hand processing. They pull their products together, um, maybe into a cooperative or some small organization or business, and then that business would be the one that um, processes their products, and then there could be a profit sharing mechanism similar to a cooperative, or to a business, for all the farmers that are involved or part of that um, small business there. So that's what at least what I find as the role, or at least answer to the question, and maybe even going a bit further down the line from there.
All
Okay.
right, interesting. Is Pak Iwan, did the answer your question, or is it okay? I think we will move to the next question from Ibu Carolina. So, could you describe further about the existence of intermediaries in the Philippines, especially the private ones? Are they purely
Okay.
community initiatives, or how do they keep the institution
Sustainable.
sustainable? Yeah,
Okay.
they
All right.
also include themselves in the business they assist or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, it's actually a very good question, a very mixed one. It's interesting that it's a mix of the private organizations that I took into the study vary. So there are industry associations, some even private firms that started performing some roles. Um, and the other one are social media groups, which is an interesting inclusion actually to the study, and NGOs, of course. For industry associations and NGOs, yes, to a certain extent, they do have sustainability issues in terms of finances, because a lot of the funding, of course, from Southeast Asia is being taken into Africa now. So even I guess in Indonesia, that's the issue that we're also facing together. Um, but for industry associations, what they do to hopefully keep themselves sustained is that they ask for membership fees, sometimes even some small service fees for different activities or services that they may be doing. So if one of their members needs some market mediation, so they go through the industry association, but the industry association asks for a small service fee. So there is that kind of model where there is a service fee model. There are still a few that rely solely on grants, on different donors that will help hopefully provide for the funding of the projects and programs. And then there are a few that really do integrate themselves into the value chain. So one industry association suddenly acted in the mango industry, suddenly acted as a consolidator. They would buy mangoes, not necessarily from their members, and then sell these to make their industry association still survive. So there are those that do that. If that is a good way of doing it, I'm not so sure. But like I mentioned in the study, try to be a more objective about it. It is a way of keeping themselves sustained or keeping themselves in operation. Is it good for the industry? It's another question to ask. But maybe another study can look into that. Um, but yeah, that's one way of doing it. No? The other one that I studied, the social media groups, that was just purely coincidence because I was looking for participants for my study. So I decided to look online and I realized that in these social media groups, no, many farmers and many mango growers are actually there asking questions, posting pictures of issues that they're having with some of their machinery. Then people answer, oh, you can sell here, you can buy from here, you can, this is how you fix that, no? This is how you operate it. No? That pest is this is this pest. No? You can address this pest using these products, so on and so forth. So in that sense, it's a very informal network of farmers, of growers, of different value chain actors, and even traders are there. Processors are also there. That the group itself, the social media group, that entity, um, becomes a hub for consultancy, becomes a hub for mediation, and even a hub for brokerage. In its sense, becomes a very interesting way uh, of gaining maybe free quote unquote knowledge and free consultancy services. But of course, the caveat to that is it's very difficult to um, sift or filter out, no, knowledge or answers that are not going to be helpful. No? Because anyone can answer, based of experience, but um, figuring out what to really follow is another question that, of course, the poster or the readers may have. No? So there is that danger there. No? While you can get free knowledge, essentially, uh, making sure that it is the right kind of knowledge, no, is a hindrance or a big barrier for social media groups as intermediaries. I hope that answered the question.
Ibu Caroline, did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Can I add a little bit more?
sure.
Yeah, being in the research and innovation institution, we actually have a mission to assist, to help, to accommodate the need of community, of course, related to the research and institution matters. Now, since you're talking about intermediary institution, will the government research and innovation institution, say university or R&D institution, government-based, accommodate, respect, or accept the demand of those intermediaries when they have questions, they have knowledge needed to help the farmers? And how do they connect themselves with that? Is there any like requirements or things like that? I mean, do they have to pay the government fee or such assistance, which is actually needed by those?
Okay.
Thank you.
Nice question. No? In the Philippine context, and there is a very similar thing that happened. No? So I will go back to at least the rice industry, what the rice industry did. So as we face the tarification of rice in the country, so what happened was like domestic prices really shot down, like extremely low, because imported rice was being brought in, right? So it's a lot cheaper and a lot lower prices. So what the government did was they really scrambled to make sure that the rice industry could compete. Now, currently, it's still doing so. So policy-wise, what the government did was like these R&D institutes, like the Philippine Rice Research Institute or the Philippine Mechanization Institute or Research Institute of the Philippines, what they did was they let out a notice that, okay, we're here, come to us, because what we need from you, they actually tried to contact NGOs, different cooperatives, different rice research, rice groups, as in like the government was the one who really approached them and said like, excuse me, we have these programs, we have these technologies, we need people to get them. We need people to adopt them. We are not able, we don't have the manpower to bring these down. We're merely the people who can supply these. So what their mindset was that, okay, we're the ones who are looking for the demand. We are the supplier. So the ones that can fill the demand for the farmers are those that are even more well connected to them. So they opened themselves up to industry associations, to NGOs, to interested groups that could help spread or diffuse these technologies out and these knowledges out much faster, much quicker. So instead of it being a very government-led thing, just solely the government was the one that opened up and really did mention that we are unable to provide these straight to the farmer. We need people to do it for us because we need millions of farmers to get these immediately. So they try to delineate the work in that way.
Ibu Lina.
Thank you so much.
The question from Ibu Sarah. So we have the village government level here where they have the autonomy to govern. In the Philippine system, is there any local governance at the same context? And how do you perceive what should the village government contribute as an intermediary?
All right. Thank you for the question. Okay, so in the Philippines, the smallest local government institution that we have is what we call a barangay or a balangay. I'll type it in the chat how it's shown. Maybe you have a similar word in Indonesian, because I know that when Tiwi and I were classmates, we know that there are a lot of words that are very similar. So balangay in the old Filipino language is a very large boat. So we adopted it to what we call now a barangay. So the lowest or the smallest local governance level in the Philippines. That's what we practice, at least. So what should their role be in terms of providing intermediation? I think it's a lot of consultancy, or not even consultancy. Their main role, I would say, would be mediation work, because they're the ones that are the most approachable. They know their constituency the most, and a lot of the farmers would actually also be part of these part of the local government. So they can be counselors or like people who would have some small work in the local governments here. So these barangays can elevate the concerns and needs of their people or their specific groups or their specific areas to the higher levels. So like the mayoral level, the city level, or the municipal level. And there is new developments in Philippine local politics where a lot of the line agency works, even especially for agriculture, will be devolved that to the local governments, to the municipal level. So currently, and I think especially in the coming years, the local government level, the barangay level, will have a very key role to play, especially in terms of mediation and providing numbers to the municipal level. And in that sense, if you take the government as a whole single entity or intermediary of supplies, the barangay or the lowest level of Philippine government can be a resource provider too, where input supplies could come from them, not from the municipal level, but similar to how I discussed earlier, it delineates down and trickles down where implementation will be at the barangay level, and even provision of these supplies can be at the barangay level. At least that's how I envision what the local government can do or the village government can do.
Okay, is it clear, Bu Saraswati? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much too. I really enjoyed the question.
Can I ask one thing?
Sure.
Is that this the village government place kind of linking efforts to the upper level of governance within that system, within that intermediary scheme. Is that like that?
Yeah, yes. I
Okay.
think that's how it can work, linking from lower to going up.
Okay.
Because of course the money is up there.
Okay. So, is there any chance that this barangay government also do the what you call the intermediary roles among the barangay itself, among
I
others, with others barangays?
I think it will be possible. It is very much so possible if it's inter-barangay. I would say, for example, if one barangay is a farming community, or for example, specializes in a certain crop, they champion that. This barangay is very much well known for mangoes, and another barangay somewhere else, is interested in developing their mango industry. So they can maybe link up together, broker farmers to other farmers to one another to maybe train each other or have a partnered relationship, in various ways, depending on how those talks go. But sure, for sure, they can be a broker to another barangay. They can broker farmers or growers too. For example, to other businesses as well. It depends on the politics, I would say, involved in the barangay leaders or the village leadership.
So how do you put this system between barangay in the upper level and also inter barangay in your model?
Well, the upper level and lower level, I think it's because that's how our government is already set up or institutionalized, where that is really the route where local issues are supposed to go up to the municipal level from the barangay level. But the inter-barangay thing, there is this institutionalized way that the municipalities do it. They call it each municipality would have this thing they call a league of barangays. So all the barangay leaders are a part of that, which is still headed by the city mayor, municipal leader. From there, the barangays are able to talk to one another. But if it's different municipalities, then I don't know. I'm not so sure if it is possible for this system. It's the already set up system to work. So in that case, I would say a different intermediary may be necessary. For example, a research institute linking two barangays together, farmers from different areas together, possibly a university or an NGO linking two groups together, two communities or two areas together. So that's how I would foresee a model of that sense to work.
Yes, thank you. That's the system, like with the upper or the inter barangay, is kind of similar with our system in Indonesia. Okay,
Yes.
thank you very much for your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tati. So, Bapak Ibu, we have plenty time for more questions. So, if you have any question, would you like to follow up or like to follow up any aspect of the research? Feel free to raise your hand. Mungkin ada lagi Bapak Ibu pertanyaan? Or actually, I also have question for you, Mr. Kevin.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, I will examine rural youth entrepreneur in agriculture sector for my dissertation. So, actually, in your research, you explore the role and capabilities of innovation entrepreneurship in rice and mango industry, right? So, were there any specific finding or insight related to the involvement of rural youth entrepreneurs as intermediaries? And how do they contribute to the agri-food business value chains? And then Second question, how do you see a rural young entrepreneur playing a pivotal role in enhancing the participation and upgrading of these enterprises in the global value chains?
Okay. I just want to clarify, rural young, right? Like young entrepreneurs that go there. Okay. For the study itself, unfortunately, I wasn't able to really look into them as an intermediary in this case. But I would say that it really depends on how they approach it. So if you're a young entrepreneur and you want to be an intermediary in the sense of, like, for example, starting a social enterprise, um, you can be an intermediary in that sense by being the broker of new technologies, of markets for rural areas. At the same time, I think another role that we can have is um, for the rural young entrepreneurs to actually join the global value chain themselves. And so globally, we do have an issue and problem with aging farmers, correct? I'm sure it will be the same in your country, as it is in ours.
Same situation.
So, so I think one thing we can do is intermediaries can actually introduce um, farming to young entrepreneurs. How not necessarily the what farming it is in itself, but the industry of agriculture. How we can link new technologies to it, because that's what the youth are actually looking for now. How to make agriculture very hip, very in line, or very cool, right? Um, and I think that's a communication issue or communication problem that intermediaries can actually address. No? In terms of value chain in the framework that I proposed, it can be a very intersectoral or even encompassing role that intermediaries can do. No, lobby for um, support for a policy to support young rural entrepreneurs, or even those that want to shift into agricultural industries. I know that in Japan, like I can't remember if it's in Japan. I think it was in Japan or in another country. Like the government will give free housing and a lot of subsidies for young people who will go back to the rural side of Japan to farm, to produce agriculture, and even they provide them with training, with technologies and all. But that also addresses, because there is a huge migration issue within Japan, like rural urban migration issue within Japan. So that hopefully also addresses that, but it also addresses a agricultural issue in that sense. So that may not necessarily be a intermediary thing to do, but in terms of policy, the government can certainly do that, and with the support of intermediaries, provide these young entrepreneurs the technologies and knowledge necessary to be successful entrepreneurs and join value chains.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kevin.
Thank you.
Ada still question, Bapak Ibu? Okay, I think I think this we already discussed almost 2 hours. So Pak Badrun, apa kita sudahi saja atau masih ada yang perlu disampaikan, Pak Badrun?
Cukup, Mbak Kak Uni, langsung aja tutup, silakan.
Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone for your active participation and engagement throughout this enlightening talks. We had a privilege of delving into Mr. Kevin research finding, and this research highlight the significance of innovation intermediary in maximizing value creation and learning for local industries and MSMEs in the agri-food business sector. And also we explore how these intermediaries play a crucial role in overcoming barriers to innovation and upgrading, ultimately enhancing participation in global value chains. And furthermore, this research also has significant implication for policy and management in the agri-food industry. Explicit identification and support for innovation intermediaries can further enhance their contribution to development of Philippine agri-food industries. So before we close the talk, I would like to thank our esteemed speaker, Mr. Kevin Christopher Elgo, PhD, for sharing your expertise and comprehensive research with us today. Your work has been instrumental in deepening our understanding of the subject matter. I also extend my gratitude to all participants, Bapak Ibu, for your active involvement and also thoughtful question during the Q&A session. Yeah, your valuable contribution have made this webinar talk truly enriching. So stay safe, stay curious, and until we meet again in our future talk webinar. Have a wonderful day ahead. Goodbye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much to everyone as well. I enjoyed this. Thank
Maraming
you.
salamat.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu.